Imagine standing at the Edge River in northern England. Around you, 10,000 men in armor. Some wear the simple mail of Saxon farmers turned soldiers. Others carry weapons forged in Norse halls, inheritance passed down through generations of raiders who answered to no king but their own ambition. You hear the thunder before you see it, not from the sky, but from the earth. Hoofbeats, war horns, the roar of men who know this is their last day on earth. They do not care. They came to this place, Yorkshire, September of 1066, because they believed they were invincible. And, for most of their lives, this belief had been tested and proven true. But on this day, something would shatter that myth forever. This is the story of the men who stood at Stamford Bridge. This is the story of the end of the Viking Age. This is the story of how empires crumble not because their enemies are stronger, but because the moment of history has finally shifted beneath their feet. Now, if you are here because you love untold battles, legendary warriors, and the weight of human choice in the face of destiny, then you are in the right place. We are about to walk through 10 of the most consequential figures and forces that converged at Stamford Bridge. Men whose lives were shaped by lineage, ambition, and the collision of two worlds. We will count down from 10 to 1, and by the end, you will understand not just what happened on that bridge, but why it mattered so much that even now, nearly 1,000 years later, we still tell this story. If you are not yet subscribed to explore more of these moments where history pivoted on the decisions of warriors and kings, where civilizations trembled or endured based on the courage of men facing impossible odds, then I would invite you to join us. Click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, become part of the community that understands that history is not something dead and filed away. History is alive, it is electric, and it teaches us something real about what humans are capable of when everything is on the line. Let us begin with number 10. The force of the English feared. They were not the elite. They were farmers, merchants, tanners, blacksmiths, men who answered the call because their king had summoned them and because they had something to defend. The feared was the backbone of English defense, a national militia that could be raised quickly and deployed to hold the line. They wore simple armor, fought with spear and shield, and had no formal training the way elite soldiers did. Yet here's what made them dangerous. They were defending their own land. They fought with the particular ferocity of men who knew that defeat meant watching their homes burn, their families taken, their entire way of life erased. The feared at Stamford Bridge was led by Earls Edwin and Morcar, powerful nobles with their own armies. These men had been soldiers their entire lives. They knew the weight of command. They knew what was coming. And still they marched north to block the Norwegian invasion. Position 9 carries us to the Vikings, the legendary warrior brotherhood. These were not present at Stamford Bridge, yet their shadow loomed over every Viking who came to English shores. The Vikings were an elite military order of Norse warriors, bound by blood oath to a sacred military code. They trained from childhood in the arts of warfare. They fought as a unit so cohesive that contemporary chroniclers described them as a single organism, many bodies with one mind. Every warrior in Scandinavia knew the reputation of the Vikings. To be one was to be forged in ritual and fire. To stand against one was to stand against discipline so complete it bordered on the supernatural. When Harald Hardrada built his army, he recruited men who aspired to that standard. The Vikings themselves may have been in decline by this era, but the ideal they represented, the perfectible warrior through systematic training, lived on in every Norseman who came to Stamford Bridge. They brought with them not just weapons but a philosophy of war that had terrified Christian Europe for 300 years. Number 8 is the stallion. Chroniclers did not record his name. What they recorded was that Harald Hardrada rode into battle on a horse of such magnificence that it became legend. This was not mere decoration. A warlord, this mount was his throne, his symbol, his strategic advantage. From horseback, a king could see the battlefield. He could command respect through presence. He could hunt down fleeing enemies. He could be seen moving across the chaos of battle, a fixed point of authority that kept an army discouraged from crumbling. The horse beneath a great warrior was itself a kind of warrior, trained for blood, for the thunder of hooves, for the screams of men. When King Harold rode toward the English lines at Stamford Bridge, mounted on this legendary steed, he brought with him 300 years of Norse tradition that said such a king, such a warrior, such a man could not fall. The English would later learn that even the finest horse cannot outrun history. Position 7 is the Norman and Harald Hardrada himself. He was not pure Viking, and that distinction matters. Harald Hardrada, born Harald Sigurdsson, had served in the Varangian Guard. This was the elite military force protecting the Byzantine emperor. For years, Harald had lived in Constantinople. He had learned siege warfare from the greatest military minds of the Christian world. He had witnessed tactics, strategies, and disciplines that no other Scandinavian king had studied. He came back to Norway bearing this knowledge, this fire, this ambition to be greater than any king before him. He believed himself invincible because the Byzantines had taught him the art of war itself. He came to England not as a raider seeking plunder, but as a conqueror believing he had already essentially won the moment he set foot on English soil. The irony was stunning. The very training that made him so formidable had come from the civilized world he was now attacking. Number 6 is the distance. Never underestimate how geography shaped what happened at Stamford Bridge. The Norwegian fleet had crossed the North Sea in September. That crossing took weeks. By the time Harald Hardrada's men landed on the coast of Yorkshire, they had endured storms, exposure, the loss of ships and supplies. They were exhausted. They were hungry. Their horses were restless after weeks confined to shipholds. Many of their supply lines were still at the coast, miles away. King Harold Godwinson, meanwhile, commanded an army that was well-fed, rested, and positioned on terrain of his choosing. Yet Harold had his own problem with distance. He was in the south of England when he learned the Norwegian invasion had landed in the north. He had to march his army, including elite cavalry units and the Royal Guard of Huscarls, across the entire length of England to reach Stamford Bridge. He accomplished this in just 4 days. 4 days, which brings us to position 5. The speed of Harold Godwinson. This response is itself a kind of weapon. It is not famous because it is dramatic, but it is profound because it was extraordinary. When a king moves his entire army across a hostile landscape in 4 days, he is moving at the edge of human capacity. Horses collapse, soldiers fall behind, the logistics become nightmarish. Yet Harold did this because he understood something crucial. If he allowed Harald Hardrada time to consolidate, to gather supplies, to integrate his force into the landscape of northern England, then the war was already lost. Harold was not just a warrior, he was a strategist who understood that speed could be a substitute for strength. By moving so fast that he caught the Norwegian king unprepared, Harold seized the only advantage he could grab. His army, meanwhile, marched in tight formation at a relentless pace. The Huscarls led the way. These were the elite. These were the men born to fight. These were the ones whose reputation was already legend even before Stamford Bridge. Position 4 belongs to the Huscarls themselves. They were the royal guard of the English kings, professional soldiers maintained in permanent service to the crown. They trained year-round. They wore heavy mail armor forged in English smithies. They fought in tight formations with a level of discipline that rivaled any force in Europe. Each Huscarl carried an axe that was itself a weapon of stunning power, the Danish axe, with a head the size of a man, its hand and a haft 6 feet long. When a Huscarl swung that axe, he could cleave through armor, bone, and shield in a single motion. The Vikings had created the axe. The Huscarls had perfected it. They had taken the weapon of Norse raiders and made it the tool of Christian English kingship. Now they marched north, moving faster than armies had any right to move, knowing that when they reached Stamford Bridge, they would collide with warriors who believed themselves unbeatable. The Huscarls did not question whether they would prevail. They had not been trained to ask such questions. They had been trained to fight until death or victory, and the distinction between the two had become meaningless to them. Number 3 is Tostig Godwinson. He is perhaps the most tragic figure in this entire saga, because he is proof that history is not made by impersonal forces. It is made by real people carrying real wounds. Tostig was Harold's brother. Once he had been Earl of Northumbria, a position of immense power. Then, for reasons that historians still debate, involving either his cruelty or a rebellion against him, he was stripped of his title and exiled. He lost everything. Humiliated, he made his way to Scandinavia. He met with Harald Hardrada. Together they forged an alliance. Tostig would help Harold invade England. In exchange, Harold would help Tostig reclaim his earldom. When the Norwegian king landed in Yorkshire, Tostig was at his side. This was not just invasion. This was a blood vendetta. This was an exiled brother returning with a foreign king to reclaim what had been taken from him, even if it meant destroying his own family. Harold, marching north, knew that his brother was with the enemy. Harold's own family was splitting along the fault lines of ambition and rage. The battle at Stamford Bridge would be fought not just between nations, but between brothers. This is what makes it real in a way that textbooks often miss. Position 2 is the Viking moment itself. By 1066, the Viking Age was already ending. The raids had slowed. The great expeditions across the Atlantic and into the Mediterranean had stopped. The Norse were being absorbed into Christian Europe, becoming knights, becoming kings with more sophisticated concerns than plunder. Yet Harald Hardrada represented one final, brilliant gasp of the old ways. He was the last of the great Norse kings to believe that a warrior could simply sail across the sea, land on foreign soil, and conquer by dint of superior courage and discipline. He came from a tradition that was already obsolete. He came with tactics and strategies that would soon seem quaint. But he came with a conviction forged in the fires of the Varangian Guard and the courts of Constantinople that he was invincible. This was a man who had seen the greatest empires of the world. He had served their emperors. He had learned from their military masters. Yet he never understood that the world had moved on. The age that produced warriors like him was ending, whether he knew it or not. And now we arrive at position 1. King Harold Godwinson. He was not supposed to be king. He was an earl, a powerful one, but succession was unclear when the previous king, Edward the Confessor, died. Harold seized the moment. He maneuvered. He consolidated power. He was crowned king. And within months, 2 men decided to contest his rule. In the south, William of Normandy, soon to be William the Conqueror, was preparing his invasion fleet. In the north, Harald Hardrada was already landing his army. Harold faced a genuine nightmare scenario. 2 invasions coming simultaneously, from opposite ends of his kingdom, by 2 men who believed they had superior claims to his throne. He could not be in 2 places at once. He had to choose which threat to meet first. He chose the north. He chose to face Harald Hardrada because that invasion was happening now. The Norman conquest, while terrifying, was still weeks away. Harold gathered his huskarls and his fyrd. He moved north at a pace that seemed impossible. On September 19, 1066, his scouts found the Norwegian army camped near Stamford Bridge, a small crossing over the River Derwent in Yorkshire. The Norwegians had won a victory the day before against local English forces. They were victorious, confident, and unprepared for the speed with which the English king had come. What happened next is burned into historical memory not because it was the bloodiest battle. It was not, but because it meant something. Harold attacked at dawn. The English came down on the Norwegian position with the fury of men who had just marched for 4 days and were running purely on adrenaline and the knowledge that their king was among them. The huskarls formed a shield wall, the ancient tactic that had defended English shores for centuries. The Norwegian formation began to break. Harald Hardrada, the legendary king who had served emperors and won battles across the known world, fell under a hail of arrows. His horse was killed beneath him. He died on English soil. His ambitions turned to ash. Tostig fell beside him, his betrayal of his own blood punished by his own blood. Harold's arrow, some chronicles suggest, struck his brother down. The Norwegian army, seeing their king fall, saw the illusion of invincibility shatter like glass. They broke, they fled. Some drowned in the river trying to escape. Some died fighting to the end. By the end of the day, the Norwegian invasion was over. Harald Hardrada, the last of the great Viking kings, was dead. The Vikings had come across the sea one final time, and they had been stopped. 1,000 years of Norse expansion, raids, and conquest ended in a single day on a bridge in Yorkshire. It would take decades for people to truly understand what had happened. That an entire age of warfare and seafaring dominance had come to an end with Harold's victory. But here's the terrible irony, the bitter twist that makes Harold Godwinson the central figure of this entire saga. He won at Stamford Bridge. He defeated the Viking invasion. He proved himself a warrior and a king. And then, just weeks later, on October 14th of that same year, he faced William of Normandy at Hastings. He was defeated. William won. The Norman conquest of England began. Harold Godwinson, the man who ended the Viking Age, could not hold against the new force rising from the south. He fell at Hastings with an arrow through his eye. He never lived to see what he had begun to build. This is why Stamford Bridge matters. It is not just a battle. It is the moment when the old age ended. Harald Hardrada died because he was too late. He belonged to a world that was already passing away. The Vikings had been the apex predators of medieval warfare for centuries, but their time was over. Even as they died at Stamford Bridge, a new power, the Normans, was already preparing to reshape England and Europe. Harold Godwinson defeated the last Viking king but could not stop the tide that was coming. His victory at Stamford Bridge was magnificent and meaningless. He had won the war against the past but lost the war for the future. And this is what makes the story resonate across nearly 1,000 years. His name is still spoken. His courage is still remembered. He faced 2 invasions with an army that was pushed to the limit of human endurance, and he beat one of them. That matters. That continues to matter. Warriors like Harold Godwinson understood something that we often forget, that sometimes you fight not because you will win forever, but because you must resist now. You stand at Stamford Bridge. You hold the line. You do everything in your power. And sometimes that is enough. Even when it is not. The Viking Age ended when Harald Hardrada fell. A new age began when William of Normandy crossed the Channel. But in that moment between, on that bridge, at that river, with Huskarls holding the shield wall and the Norwegian king dying on English ground, there was a perfect, crystalline moment of clarity. An entire world met its end. What would come next was already written, waiting in the wings. But for one day in September, Harold Godwinson stood and fought and won. And for that one day, an age that had shaped medieval Europe for centuries came to an end beneath a clear English sky. This is the story of the warriors at Stamford Bridge. This is the story of how the world changes, not gradually, but in a single clash of arms. Drop a comment below. Which of these warriors do you think embodied true leadership in the face of impossible odds?